in session. Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, committee is undertaking to study the situation at Canada Post, starting with Minister Lightbound. My 10 years of OGGO, I haven't seen you here before in our committee, so welcome to OGGO, Minister Lightbound. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Before we start, colleagues, I know we normally let we're a bit more generous with our time. Today, I'm going to keep everyone identical or straight to their time. If you run out, will cut you off. If you don't leave time for the minister to answer, I will cut him off as well. So if you just watch your clocks. Minister, the floor is yours. Again, welcome to OGGO. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members of the committee for the invitation. I'm pleased to be here. As the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, it's an honor to be here. So I would like to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity today to discuss Canada Post, which is an essential institution for our country. It is an institution that Canadians love, and they are very attached to it, as am I. I think it's important that we have this discussion together.
Their valuable report entitled Canada's Postal Service, a lifeline for rural and remote communities. As Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, I welcome the work of this committee, and our government is committed to addressing their thoughtful recommendations. On Monday, October 20th, 2025, the government tabled its response to the committee's report, and I'd be pleased to discuss it later today. Mr. Chair, we are equally committed to seeing Canada Post survive through this existential crisis it is in, and I continue, as you all know, the labor dispute is ongoing. I continue to urge both management and the union to find a path forward at the bargaining table. I've met over the course of the last weeks and months with both the union and management, and I know that they're both committed to finding a sustainable path for Canada Post, and I urge them to keep negotiating in good faith. Because Canada Post is an institution that needs saving, and at this junction in its history, and maybe more than ever, it's an institution that needs saving. Depuis maintenant près de 160 ans, et encore à ce jour,
160 years now, the workers of Canada Post have connected Canadians in good and bad times, in small villages and big cities, often offering a life saver to these communities. Since 2018, Canada has accumulated about $5 billion in losses. In 2024 alone, it lost over $1.3 billion. And in January of this year, they required a $1 billion injection to keep the corporation operational.
The corporation lost $407 million, which is their worst quarter ever. And at this point, the corporation is losing $10 million every day. In fact, with the with the labor unrest that it is currently facing, it's probably more than $10 million a day at this point. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Chair, that Canada Post is effectively insolvent. Et quand on regarde l'évolution du monde, il ne faut pas s'en surprendre. Le monde
and when we look at the evolution of the world, it's not surprising. We've seen a decrease in letter mail, which has gone from $5.5 billion, or rather 14. While they delivered to 14.3 million addresses in the past, today it's only 17.6, so it's gone.
Billion letters per year. Today, that number is 2 billion. And 20 years ago, Canada Post delivered to 14.3 million addresses. Today, that number is 17.6 million. While Canada Post delivers fewer letters to more addresses, Canadians have been sending and receiving more packages than ever before, but they are increasingly turning towards private competitors. Monsieur le Président, Post Canada fournit
Mr. Chairman, Canada Post provides an essential service to Canadians and in particular to rural, remote and Indigenous communities. And Canadians rightfully want it saved. However, ongoing bailouts from the federal government to maintain the status quo is not the solution.
Given the current financial situation of Canada Post, the status quo and repeated bailouts by the federal government are not the solution. As a minister responsible, I must ensure that the overall direction of Canada Post aligns with the government's policies and objectives, and that implies making responsible, but at times difficult, decisions. This is why in September, I announced that the Government of Canada would accept the recommendations from the Industrial Inquiry Commission, led by William Kaplan. This means making a series of changes to stabilize the financial situation at Canada Post, including flexibilities in delivery standards. Le ménage moyen au Canada ne reçoit plus que 2 lettres par semaine.
The average household now receives just 2 letters per week, yet operations are still designed for much higher volumes. Adjusting delivery standards will allow non-urgent mail to travel by ground instead of air, and will save more than $20 million a year to the corporation. This government has also removed the moratorium on the conversion to community mailboxes. 3/4 of Canadians already receive mail through community, apartment, or rural mailboxes, while 1/4 still receive door-to-door delivery. I've authorized Canada Post to introduce community mailboxes to approximately 4 million more addresses, which will ultimately save the corporation nearly $400 million per year.
We'll be lifting the rural moratorium imposed in 1994. The moratorium has not evolved in 30 years, but Canada has changed. Areas that used to be rural may now be suburban or even urban. It also means that multiple post offices operating near each other, including some just a few hundred meters apart, are required to stay open. I've instructed Canada Post to come back with a plan within 45 days of the announcement to protect service in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And let me be clear. Canada Post has an obligation to serve all Canadians in every community in Canada, and that will not change. And I'm almost done. I'll speak at my pace in question period, so I'll try to be a little faster. At last, the government is reviewing the process for increases to the stamp rate to modernize and shorten it in line with the Kaplan recommendations. Taken together, these measures will help stabilize Canada Post's financial situation by generating close to $500 million in savings per year. But there's more to do, and as such, I've also asked Canada Post to come back to me within 45 days with a plan on how they'll be taking immediate action to address its financial challenges, which means finding efficiencies, reducing costs, reducing overhead, and reviewing and lightening its management structure. Monsieur le Président, en conclusion, notre gouvernement...
Mr. Chair, in conclusion, there are choices that we need to make, and if we don't do anything, that's a $10 million in losses every day. Inaction is not an option. These are necessary changes to save Canada Post and put it on a sustainable footing, and that is what we are committing to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I forgot to welcome back Ms. Rejla and Mr. Irasi. I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I realize you've only been with us 40 times before. We're going to start our 6-minute round with Mr. Patzer. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. I'm just wondering, did you have a chance to ever read and go over the 2017 report by this very committee?
Thank you very much for the question. There's been numerous reports on Canada Post and its future, so I've looked at many of them. I wouldn't say necessarily with the same detail that perhaps members of this committee have, but I did look at all the reports, and I will highlight that in the Kaplan report on which we base the changes that we've announced on September 25th, the Commissioner has looked at all the reports, and in fact there's one part of the Kaplan report which is titled Studied to Death. I mean, the future of Canada Post has been studied over and over again, and by this committee, which I thank for the work, but also by other institutions and organizations over the years, and that has informed the decisions that we made to move forward with the transformation of Canada Post.
Okay, so recommendation number 1 from the 2017 report is Canada Post be maintained as a universal public service for all Canadians and conduct its operations on a self-sustaining financial basis while ensuring that profits generated are reinvested within the corporation. What went so wrong?
I think I've touched on it in my remarks, and you know what we see with Canada Post, we see across the world with different postal services where the volume of letter mail has declined substantially over the years. 5.5 billion 20 years ago to 2.2 billion, and what has been, I'd say the anchor for Canada Post is that it's got a monopoly on delivering letter mail. It's been the way that Canada Post has attained profitability over many years. However, as we've seen the decline in letter mail volume, as well as the rising number in addresses where it needs to be delivered, I think that accounts for what went wrong, to answer your question. But I would also add, and it's highlighted in the Kaplan report, that the organization has become too big for the volume that it needs to deliver, and it's been constrained.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to
Yes,
cut you
sure.
off there just because, as you know, we only have limited time. Recommendation 15, that Canada Post continue investing in the growth of its parcel e-commerce services which provide needed infrastructure for Canadian businesses. You did highlight that Canadians are largely choosing other providers for parcels, and I'll note that one of them is even owned by Canada Post. So how on earth could Canada Post not figure it out when one of their own subsidiaries is a profitable money-making company, and yet they can't even take that as a model and implement it for their own to be able to make money? Why is it like why is, when there's been so many recommendations, so many studies, so many reports, and I think a big emphasis has been on parcels and identifying that would be a path forward for them, and yet nothing's been done to address that for 10 years. Why is that?
I would suggest we are moving forward. The Kaplan report highlights some of what you've just mentioned, and in order for Canada Post to be competitive in the parcel business, it needs to be more agile, more flexible, and there are some things on which we as a government can do, and by that I mean lifting the rural moratorium, lifting the moratorium on community mailboxes, which is what we're doing, changing the delivery standard, which we are doing, changing the way we increase the stamp rate in this country. But there are things on which we don't have power, and that would be the collective agreements, and that has to be achieved at the bargaining table. And I'm hoping that both parties, given the dire financial situation that Canada Post is in, will find an agreement by virtue of which Canada Post will be able to be competitive going forward in the parcel business, and reach a path towards financial sustainability.
Well, I mean, why wait until they're in the middle of job action? I mean, it's gotten to the point, it's gotten so bad. It's not like this year and last year was the first years that they were losing hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mean, it was pretty evident for even like years before COVID even hit. It was evident that this was the pathway that this was going down. So why was it delayed up until this point when it's the middle of a job action, and at a point where you even admitted in your opening remarks that as a company they're basically insolvent? So why wait so long to actually implement a plan on the future of Canada Post? Why?
Well, I think when you look at the evolution, if you look back at, for instance, when the moratorium was imposed on the implementation of community mailboxes 10 years ago, the financial situation of Canada Post was not the same. Hindsight, it probably should have gone forward. I agree with you on this. And however, I would argue that given that for the first time the federal government had to invest or inject $1 billion just to keep the lights on at Canada Post, and that in the foreseeable future the government will, at the pace at which it's losing money right now, we would, without any changes, would be in repeated bailouts. I think that warranted change and beginning the transformation of Canada Post, which is what we're doing, and I'm proud that we're taking that responsible decision.
So what political considerations went into you guys not implementing the plan until the 11th hour?
Listen, I've been minister for not even 6 months now, but
You've been an MP for 10 years, though. You've been in the government for the duration of the time.
I think when you look at the evolution, which is what I've highlighted, where in 2024, for this year, we've had to inject $1 billion, where Canada Post just had this summer its worst quarter in history. I think it warranted the changes to transform Canada Post, and I think Canadians are generally on board with the changes we've announced.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Gasparo, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you for coming, Minister. I'm a little taken aback by some of the economics here in your presentation. $5 billion in losses, a burn rate of $10 million per day, probably accelerating more quickly than that because of job action, as you pointed out. Do you think it's possible for Canada Post to get on a path of financial viability?
I think it is. It's not going to be easy, and it will take some time. But that's why I've tasked the corporation to come back with a plan to right-size itself, to take a look at its overhead, find ways to find efficiencies and how it's managed, but also asking both the union and management to negotiate in light of the financial situation Canada Post is in. I think there is a way, and just the changes that we've announced on September 25th, in term would generate savings close to $500 million a year. I think that goes a long way in the initial transformation to reach financial viability for Canada Post. But there is definitely more work to do. But I think the first step to stop the bleeding, so to speak, were to go forward with these recommendations from the Industrial Inquiry Commission, which we've announced on September 25th.
Thank you. So, and maybe we can just drill down a little bit. What do you feel are the key priorities to ensuring that Canada Post is financially stable and provides quality service to all Canadians, regardless of their postal code?
I think as part of that, lifting the constraints that it's been operating under is really the first step. And when you look at, for instance, the rural moratorium, and I'll note that in reports from this committee, it was often highlighted that this needed to be updated. It will allow for Canada Post to look at ways to be more efficient. This moratorium was implemented in 1994, hasn't changed one iota in the last 30 years. And as I've highlighted, some of the rural post office that are included in the moratorium, which might have been rural 30 years ago, are now by any stretch of the imagination suburban, in some instances urban. I was given an example in BC, where on the plot of land where a post office sits, where it's covered under the moratorium, hundreds of housing units could be built, but nothing can be done because the moratorium is in place. So lifting it will allow this flexibility, and it will allow Canada Post to right-size itself, given the changing nature of the letter mail business. And Canada Post is not alone in this situation. If you look at the situation in the US and France and Denmark, they were stopping letter mail service altogether for the most part, except in certain instances on islands. But I think that the change that we're announcing is the initial step that is definitely needed to stop the bleeding, because $10 million a day, I think, by any stretch of the imagination, is not reasonable, is not acceptable to Canadians. And I think, lifting these constraints will allow for the corporation to find ways to right-size itself.
And there's definitely, obviously, a global shift going on in the parcel business, and the stats you laid out make it very clear, and this isn't unique to Canada. Having said that, I've heard from my constituents in Eglinton Lawrence who are worried about the transition to community mailboxes, especially for seniors and people with mobility issues. Are there accommodations in place for Canadians who won't be able to access their community mailboxes?
That's a very pertinent question, and to that effect, just in my own writing,
Might as well say the writing, because it's all part of the
my own beautiful writing of Louis Hébert, the best writing in the country, in all impartiality.
I may have to call a point of order on that, Mr. Chair.
Grant. No, denied. But honestly, in my own writing, 77% of my constituents still receive door-to-door delivery. So, the community mailboxes will, impact my constituents. However, when you look at the broader picture in Canada, 77% of Canadians already receive mail through community or rural mailboxes or in apartment buildings. That said, and I've made it clear to Canada Post that as they move with this transition to community mailboxes, they absolutely need to make sure that the communities which will transition need to be informed of the accommodation program in place for Canadians with mobility issues, because there is a program that exists. I think it needs to be well advertised. It needs to be known by all those who might require it. And if it needs to be enhanced, then it should be enhanced. So I'll be monitoring closely how Canada Post operates this transition, because it's important for all Canadians to have access to their mail.
That's our time. Thanks very much.
you.
Madame Gaudreau, please, for 6 minutes.
Bienvenue.
Welcome to OGGO, Minister. In fact, this is an opportunity that we have, that you have, to answer various citizens and workers' questions. If I start with the rural situation and vitality in the regions, what is the plan? Obviously, we're going to have an answer that says we're already starting this, but for people who are very worried today when they're told that the moratorium's been lifted. Well, thank you for the question. It's an excellent one, Ms. Gaudreau. When we say we're lifting the moratorium, that can raise concerns for people. And I want to be very clear in the directions I gave to Canada Post, which is to protect the service to rural and remote and Indigenous communities. That's fundamental, and I expect that principle will be respected in the plan they put forward. In terms of the moratorium, the one that hasn't changed since 1994 has created situations that are hard to understand. And I could give you a list, but in some communities, I'm thinking of Richmond Hill, which isn't necessarily rural today. Perhaps it was 30 years ago. But there are post offices that are covered by the moratorium and that might have other service points, sometimes just across the street. So raising or lifting the moratorium will indeed allow a reasonable level of service to exist across the country, where there's not necessarily that sort of anomaly, while preserving services to rural communities. I had good discussions with the Union of Municipalities in Quebec on this subject, because I understand the concerns. Often the post office is an essential link in many communities, and I'm well aware of that. It's really not what we're targeting with the moratorium. Well, Mr. Chairman, you have to understand, and Minister as well, that there's been a study done, and it's going to be implemented across the board. And from the 25th of September, we weren't expecting that there would be such a lifting. So people should have been consulted, whether it's the people who live in vulnerable situations, or when it's people who are saying, okay. I'm thinking of Francine in Mont-Roland. She's retiring in 5 years. There are other post offices that are nearby, but am I going to lose my job? What do we say to these people? So you must have some idea today. Well, as I said, it's really an effort to target post offices that are more in the suburbs, that are not really rural and remote. And in terms of jobs, the idea, and this comes really from the operational perspective of Canada Post, we'll have more information in the plan they put, but I think there are many postal workers who will be retiring in a few years and are worried. So part of that transformation will happen through attrition. I'm convinced of that. But I think that when we look and at consultations, there were many reports. A lot of work has been done at this committee. There was the Kaplan report, which is very extensive. And I think that all of the previous reports enlightened his work. The recommendations that he put forward at the end of his work, I think, are useful to begin this transformation. Because, in my opinion, once the corporation is losing $10 million a day and has just had its worst quarter, to tolerate the status quo even longer, I know that it's been the subject of exchanges between the two of us, because you said we're intervening in the midst of a conflict for these parties. But the transformation has to begin. Also, the negotiations have to happen in light of this financial situation of Canada Post. Okay, so the concerns of workers, I mean, what's going to happen if indeed we maintain the service for letter mail, and I'm thinking about municipalities that still use them. They really need that, but I'm thinking of remote regions, northern communities. Mr. Chairman, it took a whole story just for our witness last week to be able to send them the headset and microphone to. We had to delay her appearance because she couldn't receive it. So people are worried. They haven't had news since September 25th. So what is the surprise going to be in the next few days? Well, what I'm saying is the directive to Canada Post is very clear. They have to respect the service standard for delivery in rural. Well, it's an essential service for us. So, you know, the idea of moving forward with these changes is precisely because for us, Canada Post is an institution that is vital to this country and perhaps even more important to Canada than in other countries. And in Quebec, given the vastness of the territory and given that we have communities because of geography are farther than others, they need those services. For me, I wanted to ensure that we could save Canada Post and keep a good level of service to those communities. And that is the goal of the changes that we are trying to make.
5-minute rounds, and Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to cede my time to Mr. Boularice.
Certainly. Mr. Boularice, welcome back to OGGO. Floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Minister. I'm disappointed and sad as well. A few years ago, you were against cutting home delivery, and now you've changed your mind. So the direct result is going to be cutting service to 4 million people in Canada who will no longer have the right to the service they had before because you changed your mind. My first question is very simple. I represent Rosemont, Sainte-Patrie. It's a rural riding. You're going to impose community boxes on everyone there by cutting the service that people have been used to having for decades. So, simple question. In my riding, where are you going to put those community boxes? Thank you very much for the question. I'm very surprised to see this collaboration between the Conservatives and the NDP. So I salute you, Madam Block, for sharing your time, and I'm pleased to answer your question. First of all, what I'd say is that 77% of Canadians already receive their mail in community mailboxes, including in rural areas and in apartments. Secondly, when you say today you're in favor of something whereas 10 years ago you weren't, the reality is that 10 years ago, Canadians were receiving much more letter mail at home than they receive today. On average, a household in Quebec now receives 2 letters a week compared to 7 back then. Microphone, please. 7% is a percentage that is not quite reflective of the situation. You're counting apartment buildings. I'm talking about letter mail at home. But the specific question you're not answering, where are you going to put these community mailboxes in Rosemont, Patrie? Are you going to put them in schoolyards? Are you going to put them in studios? Are you going to rent spaces somewhere? Where are you going to put them? Well, I can't answer you for one specific community, but I know that they have transitioned to these mailboxes in communities for areas that formerly received their letter mail at home. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, in my own riding, a lot of people, the majority, are favorable given the change of reality. They're all right to receive their email in community in these boxes, these community mailboxes. Delivering mail to a home is $279 million a year compared to $157 for community mailboxes. So I think reasonable Canadians who are looking at the financial situation of Canada Post are saying that That's not too much to ask to go and get your mail in a community mailbox, given the financial reality. You're not answering the question. Are you going to rent spaces to put community mailboxes in Rosemont, La Petite Patrie? It's going to cost you something. So I don't see how the situation is better with the figures you just gave me now. I asked you a question. I only have 5 minutes, and I have one more question. The last year of profitability for Canada Post was 2017. You were in power then, and you let things fall apart since. So the financial situation is bad. But you're always talking about letter mail, but you don't talk about parcels. Canada Post formerly had 60% of that market, and now they only have 20%. You did nothing. So why did you let this happen, this death by 1,000 cuts? Well, there are several reasons that explain that, particularly the constraints under which Canada Post has to operate, particularly the fact that they have little flexibility for weekend deliveries, and to have that possibility when we know what Canadians are expecting. And we're not talking about just parcels. They want rapid delivery of everything. So I hope that the union and management will manage to agree on something that will make Canada Post much more competitive in terms of parcel delivery. What the union several people has suggested for years, and now the Liberal Party did nothing. Ms. Armstrong, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, who said that an expansion of the postal service, as they did in Japan for many years, could have brought in extra revenue to Canada Post. And a poll that was done at a UN agency said that 84% of countries offer financial services through the post, and that's more revenue that could have helped Canada Post, and the Liberal Party did nothing for that either. So why do you obstinately refuse to offer a banking service that could have created more jobs?
Mr. Billeries, but perhaps on another round, or perhaps with Ms. Rochford. 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis,
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Nipissing Temiskaming, which is a rural urban riding to some extent. A number of citizens have mentioned to me how they find you to be an excellent communicator. And as a result of the manner in which you... yes, so and I actually personally think the same thing, and so I'd like to add that to that comment. And certainly, I think what I have found is that the citizens with whom I've spoken, and they basically understand the need for change. I think the communication has been in such a manner that people understand. Yet, I have many seniors and rural communities that want to make sure that there will be continued service and that there will be a Canada Post that moves forward. And so basically I've heard the term it's a vital organization, and no one puts that into dispute. And so the need for change is understood, and that it's a vital organization that needs to survive is equally very present, I find, in my community. At the same time, people appreciate that we're in a digital world that's changing very quickly. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you view the role of Canada Post in the future, in this, I guess, in this digital economy in which we live.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to thank your constituents. Now I'm reassessing, and of course, my writing is, of course, the best, but I would argue yours is second best now. And you know, and it goes to answer the previous question from MP Boulris. In my mind, and it's in line with Commissioner Kaplan's report, if we are to talk about Canada Post's future and maybe how it can evolve in the next 10, 15, 20 years, it first has to be efficient at its primary mission, which is connecting Canadians, delivering mail, delivering parcels, and delivering services in rural, remote communities. But I think the work of this committee, and certainly will be useful in looking at, you know, what could be done with Canada Post over the next, in the long term. But I think in the short and medium term, it's important for us, if we are to be responsible, to stop the hemorrhage, stop the bleeding, given that Canada Post is currently losing $10 million a day, that it's, you know, it's reported its worst quarter in history in Q2 of this year. And I think Canada Post, Canadians are on board with this transformation. They realize that the world has changed. As you've mentioned, it's gone digital in the most, you know, at a pace, and COVID has accelerated that. at such a fast pace that Canada Post needs to adapt. It cannot be stuck in a business model that was designed for the 90s. It needs to adapt to today's reality. So I think that, and just on one other thing you mentioned, Madame Rochefort, which is near and dear to my heart and is important for the government, for Canada Post, and for Canadians, is as we transition to community mailboxes, it's essential that Canadians with mobility issues still have access. And the accommodation program, which is maybe not as well known as it should be, has to be fully advertised so that all Canadians have access to a reliable postal service.
It's interesting because I was going to do a test in my community about the accommodation program in the months to come to understand exactly how it works, so I can convey it to the citizens who are in need of that service. But quickly, just maybe a few words on the impact that you see on business, the business community.
And when Canada Post, when the postal workers were on strike before Christmas of last year, I think you could definitely feel the impact on small businesses. And I think it goes to show how essential a service Canada Post provides, in particular to small businesses. To this point, I'll just reiterate what I've said many times, but I'm hoping that it doesn't fall into deaf ears, both for management and the union. We need to find an agreement. The sooner, the better. And finding an agreement between both parties will lift the uncertainty that has plagued Canada Post, plagued its revenues, and will offer the kind of certainty that small businesses need as they operate.
Thank you. I'll leave it for Monsieur Boulris.
Madame Gaudreau for 2.5 minutes, and perhaps the 30 seconds from Miss Rochefort.
I'd like to look a bit beyond the midterm. I imagine that you're aware of the German model for the post office, because in the 1990s, they decided to let it be absorbed by DHL. But when I look at this, it makes me think of Canada Post and Purolator, and a lot of people are thinking about this. Are you ready to tell us today that you don't want to weaken Canada Post so that they end up being absorbed by Purolator? 100%. Canada Post has a very different mission than Purolator. They have the universal service model, the obligation to serve rural and remote communities, and indeed, through this announcement, we were often asked the question, why not privatize Canada Post? And I mean, to my thinking, it's impossible, it's unthinkable, given the essential service that it offers. We have to ensure that the corporation is on a financially sustainable and viable path, and that's why we announced the changes we did. Now, I think that in allowing more flexibility to Canada Post, particularly in terms of lifting these moratoriums, we'll see how it continues. But I hope that with that additional flexibility, with weekend delivery, for example, if the union and the management can agree on that, we'd have service that is not only essential, but also is competitive in terms of parcel delivery as well. So I think it's desirable for everyone. Well, I remain to be very concerned because the competition is fierce. And in fact, I wasn't aware of it before, but my predecessors here had said to me, how many studies have there been and so on, and now they say, but September 25th has arrived, and we're talking about exponential growth. So when we talk about reducing the costs, if we all agree that this is an essential service, well, it's rather an issue of saying how are we going to deal with the competition, because if we can't get parcels through them, we're going to go through the business next door. Whereas if I have to drive for an hour, I mean, it's not going to be an hour, I understand, in most rural areas, but people want services quickly and efficiently. So how are we going to manage this? I would say that Canada Post's strength is its huge network. And so the weakness is the same thing, and we have to find a balance between the two.
Monsieur le ministre, les Canadiens comptent
Mr.
sur...
Minister, Canadians count on Canada Post, not only for mail, but for daily life. Whether they're prescriptions or deliveries from small businesses come to our communities. And yet, for years, Canada Post has stated that its hands are tied by the rules imposed by the government. Why does this government act only now to save a system that for a long time has not functioned properly?
Life. Prescriptions, small business deliveries, and community connection. Yet, for years, Canada Post has had their hands tied by the very rules set by the government. So why is this government only acting now to save a system which was clearly not working for years?
D'abord, Madame Jensen, je vous,
First of all, Ms. Jensen, I take my hat off to you for your excellent question in French. That's admirable, and I greatly appreciate that. I would respond in saying two things. First, the reality has changed over the last 10 years. As I've already said, the letter mail volume has decreased. The financial situation of Canada Post has gotten worse. And I think that means that now more than ever, the changes we announced are important. They're justified and justifiable. And now I'd also say that following the election of April 28th, I'm part of a government, and I'm proud of that, that is wanting to take responsible decisions, sometimes difficult and courageous, to ensure the viability of Canada Post.
Okay, so you've been in the government for 10 years as an MP and as parliamentary secretary, and the problems at Canada Post didn't appear just yesterday. So why, I just don't understand, why just now sound the alarm? When Canadians are wondering if everyone at the table saw warning lights flashing, why did it take a decade for anyone in the cabinet to grab the wheel?
Yeah, well, on this, I'd say as I've highlighted, the reality has changed over the last 10 years. And, you know, if you look back 10 years ago when the moratorium on community mailboxes was imposed, the volume of letter mail was not the same. The financial situation of Canada Post was not the same. And I think now more than ever, these changes are warranted to put the corporation on a more sustainable financial footing. And as I've mentioned, in hindsight, if you look back, I think these changes were warranted in many instances, and I think it's good that we're moving forward now. And I'm glad that I'm part of a government that's willing to make the difficult decisions, show political courage, and move forward with these changes that we've announced on September 25th.
I don't want to run out of time. I have one question actually for Ms. Reza. So our committee recently reviewed the Ombuds bait and switch report, and it raised some tough questions. So we've since heard that PSPC is changing how contracts are awarded, so moving from task-based system to more focused on corporate capacity. And that's a big shift, and people are very concerned. They're worried that what it means for fairness and outcomes. Would you be willing to return to committee so we can take a closer look at those changes together and make sure Canadians are getting real value for their money?
Sorry, I'll stop the clock, point of order.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if we are straying off the topic of today's meeting being Canada Post.
We always allow very wide latitude, wide berth for questions, so I'm fine with it. We'll restart the clock. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation. As it happens, I'm coming back to committee next week, and I will be staying for an additional hour. So perhaps if that worked for the committee, and otherwise at your convenience, we'd be happy to come back and talk about some of the changes, why we're putting them in, and from a vendor performance management, how it's going to work with SMEs. Thank you.
And I'm coming back as well, so please feel free to send us your questions in advance, and we'll be well prepared.
Do I have time? Or?
Yeah, 55 seconds.
Okay, so real quick, just leadership means acting before a crisis, not after. And so after 10 years in and around the cabinet table, I guess we're wondering why should Canadians believe that suddenly today there's the political will to fix the problem that your government helped to create?
As I've mentioned, the reality has changed and the world has evolved, and I think the pandemic accelerated much of those changes that we're discussing today, whether it's the decline in letter mail volume, the digitalization of our lives, and I think that, warrants the changes that we've announced on September 25th. And I would also argue that, and thank William Kaplan for his report, which I think is a very thorough report and outlines the immediate steps that need to be taken to stabilize the financial situation at Canada Post. And I'm proud to be part of a government that's moving forward with these with the recommendations in the Kaplan report.
Thank you very much. Ms. Suds, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us today, and obviously for the attention that this file, this issue with Canada Post has taken. You just mentioned, the pace of digital change in Canadians' lives. So I've heard you describe Canada Post as a vital national institution that is worth preserving. And when you put that in the context of the pace of digital change and an increasingly digital world, I'm wondering what role you view Canada Post having in that new world where digital is taking over.
Well, I think this will warrant, and Canada Post is owned by Canadians, and I think looking at the future of Canada Post, it's important that we review its mandate with an idea of what Canada Post will look like in 10, 15, 20 years. How can it better adapt and offer services that make sense to Canadians as the world changes? And I'll be looking forward to hear from Canadians, hear from hopefully this committee at some point as well on what this can look like. But given the financial situation, given the losses in Q2, given the $10 million a day, and I hear now it's even more than that, to me it was important, and to the government it was important to move quickly, decisively, with the changes we've announced, to put the corporation on a sustainable financial footing, to give it the opportunity to right-size itself, transform itself, and to be efficient at what Canadians expect Canada Post to do, which is connecting Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I know we've talked a little bit about Royal today, but I know even myself, I have the village of Carp as part of my riding of Canada. And there is questions as to what service will look like in rural parts of our country. And so can you share your thoughts or where you think service levels are going with respect to our rural communities?
Well, the directive I gave Canada Post was crystal clear as they operate under this new paradigm where the rural moratorium that's been in place for 30 years, that hasn't changed in 30 years. So as they operate now without the constraint of this moratorium, I've made it crystal clear to the corporation that their obligation to serve Canadians and provide a good level of service comparable to what Canadians in urban areas get is paramount. And I'm looking forward to see how they intend to operationalize it. But as I've mentioned, the idea of lifting the moratorium is really because some of the communities, some of the post offices that are covered under the moratorium and have been covered for 30 years used to be rural but are now suburban, urban, and the list of examples is fairly lengthy across the country, and it makes for incongruencies where you would have communities where you have a post office and a point of service across the street in suburban Canada.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Certainly an important consideration, which you're obviously on top of. During your announcement in September, you indicated that reviewing the process for increases to the stamp rate to modernize and to shorten it in line with Commissioner Kaplan's recommendations was an important piece. So I'm curious the status of that review, if you have any update or any specific barriers that there are to a shorter stamp rate increase process.
I'll be happy to report that there are no barriers. We'll be moving forward with an expedited process that will allow Canada Post to increase the stamp rate. It's an important point because the time it takes to increase the stamp rate to better reflect the actual cost of delivering mail, and the burdensome aspect of that process has made it so that the stamp rate in Canada has not kept pace with what other countries have done. If you look at international comparisons, we're way down compared to other countries in terms of the price of stamps in Canada. So I think giving that flexibility to Canada Post to move quickly and to alleviate, and as part of our red tape reduction process, that'll be included. So we're moving forward with that.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll go to Mrs. Block. Then we'll have one more intervention from the Liberals, and then we'll finish up with Madame Gaudreau for 2.5. Go ahead, Mrs. Block, for 5.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us, as well as your departmental officials. In your opening remarks, and I've heard you repeat it a few times during your answers to my colleagues, you say that Canada Post is losing $10 million a day or more. Given that Canada Post has reported a $1.5 billion operating loss, which works out to about $4.1 million a day, where exactly are you getting the $10 million a day figure from?
So we've had extensive communications with Canada Post Chief Financial Officer, and this is on a daily basis currently. That's what they're losing. In fact, it's probably more at this point, and this is largely due to the labor unrest that we've seen in the last 20 months, truth be told, because just if you look at when flyers and commercial mail is not sent, that impacts the bottom line. It's $1 billion in revenue for Canada Post. Okay. So all this taken together accounts for this very high number of 10 million, but I'm hearing it's way higher right now, though the 10 million has been duly verified. I can't speak to the numbers I've heard recently, so I won't go there, but I think it speaks to the importance for the union and management to reach a deal, negotiated deal, the sooner the better.
Thank you. You also mentioned the recent study that this committee undertook. And as you may be aware, while Conservatives agreed with the recommendations that were submitted in that report, we also submitted a supplementary report, specifically which noted the testimony of Canada Post CEO, who noted that the federal government failed to approve their strategic plan from 2019 to the date of his testimony. And so I'm wondering if you would advise us, what were the political reasons behind vetoing the independent strategic plan submitted by Canada Post over the last 5 years?
I can only speak for my tenure as minister. I've approved their latest corporate plan, and it's my intention that corporate plans be approved and submitted and available for review by parliamentarians on a yearly basis as we go forward, because I think it's important for Canadians to see how the transformation is going.
Right. Okay. Were you made aware that their plans had not been approved from 2019 to 2024?
Defer to the Deputy Minister on this one.
Yeah, I think that those corporate plans have been reviewed and looked at from the Treasury Board, who provides an annual overview of that. And I think some of the considerations were around how best to manage the fiscal situation and some of the issues that were faced with the labor unrest.
And do you think you did that, given where Canada Post is today, by not approving their strategic plan over the last 5 years? I'm just going to leave that question there. Minister, you've talked about Canada Post now in a process of right-sizing itself. How many additional jobs do you expect will be lost under this right-sizing, and over what timeline?
That's a question best asked to Canada Post, who's in charge of the operations. I'm not. However, I think even as the government is going through a comprehensive expenditure review where we're looking at efficiencies across government, I think it's only fair to expect the same thing from Canada Post, and even more so given that they're losing so much money. So I'm looking forward to see their plan. It's forthcoming. I think they have about 20 days left to bring that plan back. But on the specific numbers you're asking, it's best asked to the corporation in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post.
So at no time while you were preparing to make these announcements that happened on September 25th, you took into consideration the impact on the workforce that your announcements would have?
Well, that's not correct. Of course, it's something, when you look at the organization, Canada Post has a very big structure that is designed to deliver volume that are not existent today. So I think it's only fair to ask the organization to right-size itself given the nature of letter mail today.
So you announce a plan and then tell them to right-size themselves without knowing exactly what the cost to the workforce might be?
Brief answer, please.
Well, on that note, I'm not in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post. Management is, so I think that's a question best asked for management. But when you have a Crown Corporation that's losing $10 million a day, I think it's only fair, and I'm sure you would agree, MP Block, to ask them to find the efficiencies and right-size themselves.
Thanks. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Yet.
So, in regards to right-sizing, the average household now receives 2 letters per week. Dramatic decrease from 5 years ago. And there's a degrading of demand for letter services to individual households. However, parcel delivery obviously is, there is significant demand. Some of the traditional media companies, for example, have picked up a lot of the deliveries from Amazon and other outlets. So can you talk a little bit about the strategy around parcel delivery and where how critical that is for Canada Post?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. And I think it's very important for Canada Post to find ways to be competitive. And I think it's highlighted in the Kaplan report that in order for Canada Post to be competitive, it needs to find ways to be more flexible, more agile. And a lot of this has to do with management and the union finding ways to work together much more efficiently than they've done in the past. I think the relationship between labor and management, I'm hoping for a renewal of that relationship given the financial circumstances and that they'll both work together to, and I've met, me and my team have met extensively with the union. I've met with management as well, and I can tell that they both have, at heart, the future of Canada Post. They both want to find a viable path for the future of Canada Post, and I'm hoping that they'll find ways in their collective agreement to make it possible for Canada Post to find a financially viable future.
No further questions, Chair.
Madame Gaudreau, please, to finish off. Then we'll suspend quickly to allow our new witnesses to join us. Go ahead, Madame.
I'm going to come back to parcels because I'm thinking about communities. I visited the Magdalen Islands, and following September 25th, people said I need prescriptions, and it's Canada Post that is responsible for the delivery, so regardless of where it is geographically. And these people are so worried. They're saying that there's so much competition. Canada Post will take care of letters, but they'll drop parcels. What reassures me is that we're talking about essential services, that you won't prevent the safety and security for so many letters and parcels, but at what price? How much are you prepared to put into this? How big a deficit, knowing that it's an essential service? Well, I'd say the least possible, because Canada Post's mission in the end is to offer the services that they offer in a financially viable manner. Now, reality dictates that it's been impossible the last few years for them to do so. That's why the government provided $1 billion and will give more, but the least possible as far as I'm concerned. Canada Post has to find a way to operate, amongst others, by eliminating the constraints that they have. They need to be more efficient and to continue pursuing its essential mission. And thank you for raising the point. For Quebecers are very attached to Canada Post, as are all Canadians, and especially in the remote regions like the Magdalen Islands, as you mentioned. So, having said all that, people are aware that bailing out Canada Post year after year, and I think this answers Mr. Boulris, in part, this would come at a cost to other services that Canadians depend on. So I think that is how Canada Post really has a path that needs to follow, and this transformation is what we are asking of them. I have many questions, Mr. Chairman, but what now I can see is that there are many components. I know there are 20 days left, but in my opinion, the CEO absolutely has to come and speak to us about this request that's been put forward here. We're somewhat reassured, but we're still unsure about many elements, including this service. If I may, the conditions are clear. They have to maintain service to rural and remote communities. And given your interest and your defense of the regions, I'd really like to speak with you. I'd say in English. I don't have the French translation.
Et je veux m'assurer que ça soit le cas.
And I'll ensure that that's the case. That's what I hope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Minister, thanks for joining us again. Colleagues will suspend for a couple of moments to bring in our new witnesses. for your patience. We have witnesses today, Mr. Ryder and Mr. Lee. I understand you both have opening statements. Why don't we start with yourself, Mr. Lee, as you're virtual, and then we'll go to Mr. Ryder. 5 minutes each, please, if I'll ask you to watch your clocks. Thanks.
I'll try. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, my disclosures to the honorable members. Number one, I don't belong to or donate money to any political party or allow any lawn signs. Secondly, I completed my 850-page PhD thesis in 1989 on Canada Post, using every annual report of the Post Office Department and Hansard from 1820 to 1981, as well as public archives on Wellington Street. Three, I completed my 2015 MLI study exclusively based on every annual report of Canada Post from 2000 to 2015, and the annual CRTC media monitoring stats reports and the annual Payments Canada stats reports. Fourth, I completed the 2024 study for the Canada Post at the tipping point using the same government sources and audits, but updated to 2024. Finally, my final disclosure, for 35 years, I've taught the strategy capstone course, researching competitiveness of firms and industries in Canada and the United States. Before summarizing my empirical research over the past 25 years, I want to briefly mention the single most important analysis I've ever read concerning communications technology and policy, because it goes to the very core of all the issues you're discussing. In 1995, MIT engineering prof Nicholas Negroponte, co-founder of Wired magazine and the very famous Media Lab, wrote Being Digital. He argued that all of existence is composed either of atoms or electrons. Human bodies, mine, yours, indeed any physical object, including trucks and planes and trains, are made of atoms which have mass and weight. And Einstein's laws of relativity limit the speed at which atoms can travel, i.e. very slowly. By contrast, any information that is digitized is comprised of electrons which have no mass and no weight. This means that electrons travel at the speed of electricity, which is almost the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. From these principles of physics, Negroponte concluded that electrons everywhere in the world will always trump atoms in the realm of communications. From this, Negroponte predicted astonishingly in 1995 the complete digital deconstruction of every Western society over the next third of a century, of everything informational, from post offices to newspapers to broadcasting to publishing to education to entertainment to banking to government to payment systems to healthcare. Whew. And he was absolutely correct before any other person in the world. My 2015 study of the audited annual reports of CPC revealed that the Negroponte trend started in Canada in 2006, a steep decline of letters every year without exception. My 2024 report brought the numbers up to date, showing the very same report with no exception, declines every year. In the core business, you've already heard the numbers, decline from 5.5 billion to 2 billion pieces. However, some do not understand that these numbers continue to collapse going forward. Indeed, letter mail will mostly, I predict, disappear within 10 years, as the remaining small businesses that still use mail will digitize their value chains due to the Negropontean logic. And those few remaining elderly that still write letters will sadly die. The second core business of parcels is very different because e-commerce increases by 9% a year. Yet during and after the pandemic, CPC lost over half its market share in parcels due to the entry of the gigs. In my 2024 report, I provided estimates of average operating costs for truck, driver, and fuel. About $65 an hour for CPC, $45 an hour for the big private contractors, couriers, and about $25 an hour for the gigs. Now you can understand why CPC is collapsing in parcels. As the CEO and CFO stated in 2024, the current architecture is not sustainable with this decline. As I've stated for the last 5 years, long before Kaplan did, CPC was and is insolvent, unable to pay its bills as they become due. This is why the government provided a $1 billion bailout and will have to again and again and again, bigger and bigger and bigger until it's restructured. There are critics, probably in this room, who state this doesn't matter as it's an essential service. I argued this is an error that assumes precisely what is being debated because, one, CPC is not a going concern. It exists only because the government's saving it by a bailout. Two, the alleged essential services provided are not essential. supported by the radical decline in usage by more and more people every year who use the post office less and less. If it was essential, we wouldn't stop using the post office. 3, it's argued that CPC doesn't have to make a profit. It's no different than national defense. This is a false analogy because defense is a pure public good that benefits everyone, and it's not divisible, whereas Canada Post delivers a private good that is divisible in discrete units. We call them letters with stamps. In conclusion, this is not an argument to shut down or privatize the post office. However, it must be radically restructured to a much smaller entity, maybe 15,000, maybe 20,000. I don't have the internal data from Canada Post that services those citizens most in need, the approximately 15% of Canadians. StatsCan estimates it precisely at 5.9 million Canadians in the rural and remote communities where there are no private alternatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Lee. Mr. Ryder, over to you, sir. Welcome to OGGO.
Thank you. And I thought this committee was tough. Look at what Ian just told you there. My God, he scares you to death, doesn't he? I'd like to make 4 points, if I can, in my 5 minutes. And much of this you've already heard, and I apologize because I didn't know what other thirds you were going to hear. First, Canada Post is a very sick company. If I was teaching this at the university, I would describe it as being in a death spiral. This is what we found with the Hudson's Bay Company, for instance. It's a crown corporation backed by the Canadian government, and because no postal service in the world has failed in the last few years, then I don't think it's necessarily going to be dead in 6 or 12 months, but clearly action, strong action is needed now, sooner rather than later, and I said in my little note, think months, not years in terms of change. Secondly, I'm fine with the changes being proposed by the federal government and the minister who sat here just a few moments ago. Moving letter delivery to community mailboxes is fine. I've had a community mailbox for 3 decades. I absolutely love it. I actually view it as a service enhancement. I go away. I don't worry about a porch poacher going through my mailboxes when I am not there. Same thing with getting rid of Canada Post-owned post offices, probably in favor of franchises. I haven't been in a post office, again, for decades. I visit a Shoppers Drug Mart that has a Canada Post kiosk inside. It's got longer service hours, and it operates 7 days a week. That's an enhancement to the service that I used to get from Canada Post's own post office. And slow delivery of mail from 4 days to 7 days, you know, I don't think most people will notice that. But I want to emphasize that while these are necessary changes, they are not sufficient. Ms. Block pointed out the math, some of the math problems. I'll just point out another one. If Canada Post is losing $1.5 billion this year, and you do these 3 things, you save $500 million. Step in the right direction, but you're still losing $1 billion. We've got to go beyond that, which gets me to point 3. Canada Post has to also generate more revenue. You can't cut your way, you can't shrink your way to success. You've got to find a way to generate more revenue. Now, the only bright spot is parcel mail. Parcel mail is where they've lost the biggest volume, but they also have a couple of competitive advantages. Number one is they serve every community in Canada. The private couriers have chosen to cherry pick. They visit suburban areas and urban areas, but if you're in northern BC, if you're the Magdalen Islands, too bad FedEx can't get there. In fact, oddly, the private people subcontract to Canada Post at that point for the delivery. But how do you get back to a higher market share? So people sitting at this table, that means that a crown corporation is going to have to try to take back market share from private companies, and that raises lots of interesting philosophical issues. I'm not keen on a postal bank or on postal insurance. I'm surprised Ian didn't mention this in his comments. We used to have a Canadian postal bank, and it shut a little over 60 years ago. If Canada Post were to get into the banking business, what competitive advantage would it have? It doesn't know the first thing about banking. And if you start a bank today, for it to generate any kind of significant profit, you'd be talking years and years and years, and you do not have years and years and years. About the only bright spot I could suggest is looking at other delivery partnerships. Canada Post has this army of workers out there who are trained at delivery. Are there other people who might need deliveries that they can go to? Finally, if we're going to win back customers, if Canada Post is going to win back customers, it has to have stability. And therefore, I would agree with what the minister said around having a collective agreement. We also need a collective agreement that's not for 6 months or 8 months or a year. We need a 3-year, 4-year collective agreement so that we can get some harmony out there as it goes. But I'll be honest with you, as I sit here today, I don't know how you achieve that. I suspect if I was a member of the union, I would want to sign a collective agreement that gave me job guarantees. Bless your heart, Ian, for suggesting I'm not going to go quite as big a number as you, but I think we're looking at least 10,000 employees who need to be either encouraged to retire or perhaps given severances to go. No union is going to want to agree to that as you go forward. They want to keep every job that they've got today. So I don't quite know how you're going to find that labor harmony that is so necessary. But if you can get that harmony and then you free up Canada Post to tackle some of these tough issues, I think there is a future for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank both of our witnesses for joining us today. This is much more interesting than I have to admit I thought it would be. I've really appreciated your testimony here, and it's caused me to wonder why both you, Mr. Ryder, and you, Mr. Lee, can, speculate on the number of jobs that could be lost. And we heard from our minister earlier that he didn't give that a thought because it's not his job. So I think that's an interesting takeaway for me. I'm going to direct my first questions to Mr. Lee. You have long commented on the future of Canada Post, the postal services here in Canada, and obviously a long-standing interest in that corporation. Would you comment, or would you say that you believe the government has been aware of the deteriorating state of the postal service for some time, as you have indicated?
Yes, and I realize my answer is going to sound self-serving, so I'm just disclosing that right away. I was asked to testify in 2016 before the Blue Ribbon panel set up by then newly elected Trudeau government. And they appointed a Blue Ribbon panel. It's been well published. Everybody knows that panel. And I went before it, and I had just published the year before my 2015 Macdonald-Laurier Institute report with all the data from the of the losses and the declines and so forth. And I had in there the radical surgery that I recommended, and which was franchising all post offices, ending 5-day-a-week delivery, ending the home delivery to the 25% of Canadians who are privileged to get home delivery. And full disclosure, before anyone attacks me, yes, I'm one of those people. I shouldn't be getting home delivery to my door, but I do, although there's no letters coming anyway, so it doesn't matter. But to your question, I put some very precise recommendations in that report. I was there for probably 3 hours, I think, testifying, and they rejected the advice, the concrete, very concrete recommendations, and then I disclosed them in the media in questions. And at the time, the Prime Minister, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm absolutely certain the Prime Minister and Dominique LeBlanc, the minister responsible for, rejected it, and did and did the management of Canada Post. So I'm not trying to point the finger at one person or one. Everybody said, no. And their basic argument, I think, was this very quickly. Yes, the letters are declining very precipitously, but it's come to an end. It's going to plateau, and the problem is going to be okay because we're going to stabilize at a lower than 5.5 billion letters, but it's not going to be that bad. And I said, my response was, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the decline has plateaued. Any one of you can look at the decline, and every year it goes down by 6 to 8 to 9% in the pieces delivered of letter mail. And it's not because something I'm doing, it's what Negroponte pointed out, that the economics of digitization just overwhelm the physical distribution of letters and mail.
Thank you very much. So Blue Ribbon panel in 2016. 2017, the task force suggested changes. The committee did a report, years of posting losses, and still the government didn't approve the strategic plans being put forward by Canada Post for 5 years. Would either of you like to comment on that?
Maybe different spin than Ian on this.
Okay.
I think 10 years ago when Ian testified, you had a fairly healthy Canada Post, and therefore we find the need for change is harder to get through when things look fairly healthy. But it was 5 years ago, around 2020, that you had the first significant signs that something wasn't right at Canada Post. Unfortunately, that was also when the country was facing COVID. And I think if I was in government, I'm not, but if I was in government, which challenge do I face first, a pandemic or the situation at Canada Post? Probably people prioritize pandemic. But I would think the government should have dealt with this sooner rather than later. I was actually surprised when Mr. Kaplan submitted his report in May that we didn't get a response until September. The report is very clear on what it has to say, and I was waiting for it to drop then. So I think there is a good reason perhaps to say we've been slow, but again, in my world, late is better than never.
Can I just add to that? I don't disagree
I'm
at all.
sorry, I have to interrupt, Mr. Lee. I'm afraid that is Mrs. Block's time, but perhaps you can get a response in on the next intervention.
Okay.
We'll go to Mr. Gasparo, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you both very much for your very detailed presentation. And if there was a window that was open on a higher floor, I could jump out of it. It was, pretty stark. Geez. Yeah, exactly. Mr. Ryder, there have been some, I think you made some comments about Denmark, about how the Denmark Postal Service has been the canary in the coal mine. Denmark's postal service is ending letter delivery after a 90% decline in mail volume and strong national digitization strategy. Can you possibly speak to the key factors that made this possible in Denmark, such as digital infrastructure, government public policy, cultural readiness more broadly?
I have to give you a two-part answer. To that. First, although they say the post office is discontinuing letter mail, they have another organization there called DOC, which delivers newspapers and magazines. And as of January 1st, 2026, they're going to pick up the letter mail. Also, it costs $6 a letter in Denmark to mail a letter. It's $1.44 in Canada. But the other key thing here, and Ian, bless his heart, has been saying for some years that we should be getting rid of letter mail altogether. We're not in a position yet in Canada because of digitization. We haven't digitized. What do I mean by that? You get a digital passport. I still have a physical one. I used it today. How about a digital credit card? Well, I still get a physical credit card. I still get a physical driver's license. I still get a physical health card. Now, Denmark digitized many of those things. Therefore, they were not using the mail to send them. But when we had the strike back in November, December, there were all kinds of, talked about worried Canadians. Where am I going to get my passport to take my trip? What am I going to do? Until you digitize those, I think we're still going to need the letter mail. But to Ian's point, and he's absolutely right, and I call it the canary in the coal mine, I look out 10 years from now and assuming digitization solves those things and makes it go away. And by the way, neither of us have mentioned AI. God knows what AI is going to do. I think 10 years from now, yeah, letter mail could be dead here in Canada.
Yeah, if you want to add something, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to leave anyone with the idea that the process of digitization is over. We are in the middle of it, or perhaps 2/3 of the road. We can quibble over, whether it's 2/3 of the road. In the next 10 years, I do believe we know there's discussions in many countries, including Canada, about digital passports. Yes, digital driver's licenses, digital health cards. So that's coming. We know that is coming. And so my point being that we won't be dealing with I didn't say we should end letter mail. I said we should be planning on its very imminent demise. So we don't have to worry about that. We should really be focusing what Marvin said. How are they going to get back into the game in parcels? Because that is their core business, parcels and letters. And if they don't get back into parcels, then their future is very bleak, because I don't believe they have a snowball's chance in hell, pardon my language, of getting into banking, because we have one of the most dynamic and brutally competitive bank systems in the world, which is why the French banks didn't come in, and the German or the Swiss or the American or the British, because they know that they wouldn't make it here.
I guess it might.
Règlement, Monsieur le Président. Parfois,
Madame?
les interprètes sont incroyables.
Sorry, the interpreters are incredible, but the sound isn't coming through every time with Mr. Lee. It's cutting in and out a bit, and perhaps he could speak a bit more slowly.
Yeah, I think that's probably for all of us in the room just to slow down a tiny bit our cadence on our speech. We'll go back to Mr. Gasparo. You have a minute.
So you touched on parcels, so maybe I'll be really quick. If you guys can just please provide what strategies would you recommend to help Canada Post regain some market share in parcels and compete more effectively with the private sector?
Canada Post has two competitive advantages in that area. Canada Post has two competitive advantages in that area. One is they serve every community in Canada, every mailbox in Canada. The private people don't, so that's one advantage. And the second, the prices. We haven't talked necessarily about a big jump in postal rates. Most small business people were very reluctant to move to the other delivery people because they get a much better deal from Canada Post. Why they did leave, however, was they weren't certain the parcel would get there. And until we get some harmony back in the marketplace so that it's not a Russian roulette, then I think those people are staying away.
And I'll just add to that, I agree with what Marvin said completely.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, we're out of time for, but perhaps the next intervention. We'll go to Ms. Gaudreau, please.
D'entrée de jeu, je dois vous dire.
First of all, I'd like to say, Mr. Chairman, that if I speak very quickly in French like that, they'll have trouble, the interpreters, but I have the impression that if I'm myself speaking my own language, I don't have enough time. And I know that I have missed several components, and I don't want these gentlemen to repeat. It seems all very relevant, but I want to point that out. I feel discriminated against. I'm going to say it. What I understood from your opening comments was that a potential privatization would be necessary to achieve some kind of level of profitability or break-even. But we're talking about urban areas, yes, I heard that we talked a bit about the Magdalen Islands and things like that. But competition doesn't want to know anything about servicing those rural areas. And it could be even in Mont-Laurier in my riding. So we're 41 million people. Currently, there are 17 million addresses. And I'm trying to see, do we want to experience what other countries did in the privatization of an essential service? And I'd like to hear you on that point.
Apologies. I'm not getting any translation, so I didn't really understand what you said.
Same here. I didn't get any translation either. Sorry.
Testing on the English channel. 1, 2, testing.
Or was it not?
It was earlier.
I assume.
It's not.
We'll pause for a moment, and I'll get the IT to check both. We'll suspend. back. We'll start at the very beginning for you, Madame Gaudreau. Thank you very much.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le
Thank you
Président.
very much, Mr. Chairman. So I'm wondering, can you hear me? It's fine? I want to focus on this because I want to listen to the tape later. I'm wondering, if we wish that Canada Post be a service for all Canadians and Quebecers, we're 41 million. When I hear, I'm sorry?
Ce n'est peut-être pas là, mais je suis désolée.
I'm sorry. You don't understand, perhaps. I'm wondering about privatization. I'm a businesswoman, and so obviously there are costs, there's profitability, you move on or you don't. When you look at other countries that privatized, unless there are some that I'm not aware of, but it didn't work with the ultimate goal of offering the service to all. How could we attack this with saying either break even, but offer this service to all 17 million addresses coast to coast to coast here in Canada?
Me or Ian? Either one. So let me just say quickly, I'm not advocating privatization. I don't necessarily think we're at that stage in the game to consider it. Certainly, I am advocating that Canada Post take on the private delivery people and try to gain back the market share. I also think they should be looking at other kinds of partnerships that they can bring value to as it goes forward. But ladies and gentlemen, you do have an alternative strategy here. Again, quick math, if you've got 17 million households and each household paid a $100 a year Canada Post tax, you'd have $1.7 billion. Now, I've witnessed from afar how people reacted to carbon taxes. I have a feeling Canada Post taxes wouldn't be loved any better, but that is an alternative. And in the United States, they have done that to some extent, dipped into their own treasury to fund the U.S. Postal Service. I would like to encourage management to do it on their own, give them the best chance before I say we should dip into our pockets and pay.
Monsieur Lee?
Mr. Lee?
You're muted, Mr. Lee.
I'll just go a little bit differently. I think that in Canada, we have already de facto, not de jure, privatized much of the post office in the biggest cities, the Calgarys, the Montreals, the Toronto, the GTAs, etc. Because if you look at the stats and break it down, the private couriers, national, regional, and local private couriers have taken over a very large chunk of the business in the bigger cities in Canada, but they haven't in the rural and remote communities. And so I think we've got to really look at the future of Canada Post, that there's two completely different scenarios. In the cities, I know all kinds of people that just don't use the post office. I'm talking business, I'm talking individuals, and yet you go to the rural, I grew up on a farm in rural Eastern Ontario, in Lanark County. And you go to these small towns and communities, and I'm sure the same as in rural Quebec, they're very, very dependent. So I think we have to come up with two different solutions, one for the rural and remote, because their needs are completely different, where there's no alternatives. And in the urban cities across Canada, many Canadians have abandoned the post office, which is why there's not this huge blowback that we saw in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s with the postal strike.
Ben, j'apprécie ce que j'entends,
I
Monsieur.
appreciate what I'm hearing, Mr. Lee, because, in fact, not only you have probably access at broadband, internet, and you also have everything you need. And you're very intelligent. And I think about people who are different, who maybe have disabilities, or whether they're intellectual or physical. And for me, it's as if we're abandoning them if we don't demonstrate that the service will be provided, not just to the place, but in a way that the individual is able to receive it. So we're talking distance, but there's a high percentage of people who are illiterate, and people don't all have a cell phone. So there are black holes that have no service a few kilometers from here when I just head home to my riding. And so technology, we have to be very careful with, and we're fearful of artificial intelligence, because you can understand, gentlemen, that laws and legislation doesn't move as fast as technology does. So my time is up, but I thank you very much, because that gave me a good idea. Thank you.
So, Mr. Patzer, please. We'll do our 5-minute rounds.
Thank you very much. I guess maybe I'll chuck this out there to both of you, but Purelator, for example, which is actually owned by Canada Post, at least the tune of 91%, first half of 2025 turned a $101 million profit. Do either of you know what their market share is of parcel delivery in Canada? And why is that not a model that Canada Post is looking to use when it's their own when they actually own that very company?
I don't know. Ian, do you know what the market share is?
I don't have the market share for the courier companies, but I do want to point out, because I did look at them. If you look at their head count, they're not, forget 65,000, forget 25,000. Now, I'm not trying to justify what, as you know, what I've advocated on that side, but all the major courier companies in this country are in the 5 to 7 to 10 to 12,000 head count. And Canada Post, I just looked it up in their annual report, 75% of their cost structure is wages. And so when people say we're going to downsize Canada Post, but we're not going to get rid of people, well, it's not possible. The arithmetic doesn't work.
Back to your point about Purelator, remember, it is like the other courier companies, so it only really serves urban and suburban markets. It's able to cherry pick. They also charge a higher cost. It's $1.44 to mail a letter in Canada. It's not $1.44 to ship something by Purelator. So that business has taken that high end of the market, and it competes very successfully against the other courier companies. Canada Post offers a different kind of a service.
That's right. That's right.
And so, Mr. Lee, with your 2015 report, I have, I mean, I didn't read it line for line, but I definitely flipped through it and read a good chunk of it. Let's just say that the government at that time had implemented your report. What standing would Canada Post have today, and what would it look like today?
Thank you for that question. It would not be hemorrhaging the cash that it's hemorrhaging now. In fact, I don't believe it would be losing money. But remember, I did advocate pretty radical surgery. I said franchise all the post offices. I agree with Marvin what he said. They give great service. I've been going to a Shoppers Drug Mart franchise for a long time. So to your question, the $400 million from the door-to-door to the 25% of Canadians, that would 10 years at 400 or 500 million, and Deloitte estimated at the time it was 500 million. Well, there's $5 billion. That's the accumulated loss of the last 8 years. Just that saving alone. And if they had ended 5 day a week, the universal service delivery 5 days a week to the 17 million addresses, the savings there, yes, reduction in headcount would have been massive. And then you franchise the post offices. I mean, you're talking in the billions. This will not bring back, I want to get this out for everybody. This will not bring back letter mail. It will not. We're not going back to the writing letters to our dear old grandmama. Those days are gone. The old analog economy is gone. We're deep into the digital economy. But it would have given Canada Post a lot of degrees of freedom and a lot more money to reinvest into parcels to recover their game. If they had done this 10 years ago, they could have saved literally billions on those costs that they absorbed needlessly.
So the minister was here and basically was trying to say that it was only just recently that the struggles really happened. You're indicating, I mean, obviously as far back as 2015 that it needed drastic measures. You had the foresight to know that. Why didn't the government? When they had 10 years and didn't do anything.
I'm guessing it was because it's such a political hot potato, and this came out in my thesis. I mean, and I want to be very careful and very delicate, but CUPW has a reputation of being the most militant union in the federal public service. And if anybody wants to challenge me on that, I can point you to pages. And I ended up 1/3 of my thesis was on all of the strikes in Canada Post. They were even involved, well, they weren't called CUPW, but they were involved in the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike, postal workers. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm not condemning them. I'm just simply saying that it's much more militant than the other public sector unions in the government of Canada. And so it could be a reluctance to go down that road and engage in a long protracted strike.
So basically, the political will from the government for the last 10 years to act wasn't there, is basically what you're saying.
In essence.
Maybe offer something slightly different. In our world, the need for change often explains how people want to change. So 10 years ago, I don't think people looked at Canada Post as being on the precipice of what we now see today. Therefore, the need for change 10 years ago, it would have been a much harder sell. It would have been a much easier sell 5 years ago, but we were tied up with the pandemic. So you're on the right track. These are changes that should have been done before, but if you could have convinced people 10 years ago, you're a better person than I am.
Just to put some facts on the table.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
Okay.
I was just going to say that I think
Okay.
election, but I digress.
Thanks. We'll go to Ms. Rochefort, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank you for that discussion and that additional comment there, Mr. Ryder. For me personally, I think back 10 years, and I think when we were bringing in some of the post office boxes in my community and the outrage that people had to switch from home delivery to post office boxes, I simply could not see the changes that are being proposed now, being proposed 10 years ago. But something else that has mystified me that I would love to hear both of your comments about is the lack of willingness by the union to want to engage in organizational or operational flexibility. I guess in the Kaplan report, he recommended a series of changes to address the need for flexibility, and I think Canada Post had discussed hiring part-time staff, and there was different options that were brought forward. But why was the union critical of that, and why have they been resistant to? I mean, in this day and age, they see the competitors, especially with parcel delivery. Why are they so against operational flexibility?
So if you don't mind,
my own interpretation.
Letting him go.
My own interpretation is that because Canada Post and the workers have been under the, let's call it the letter mail monopoly model for so long, 2 centuries. I mean, literally going back to the origins of the post office. And it was the letter mail monopoly model. They had a monopoly and they didn't have to compete, and nobody expected them to compete. We didn't ask them to compete. So that's part of their culture. That's part of their corporate culture, their value system. And then because of this transformation into the parcels where it is not a monopoly model. It's a brutally, viciously competitive model. And I think that the transition is very, very difficult to switch from a monopoly model mentality into a much more competitive mentality. And the second reason is, understandably, I'm unionized at my university. Unions do not want to give up past benefits that have been negotiated at the bargaining table, and CUPW has been very clear about that, and I certainly understand that.
So what I was going to tell you is that there are 2 kinds of flexibility. One would be to bring in these part-time workers who only work on the weekends. The other would be to say to workers, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep you employed, but your weekend might be Tuesday, Wednesday, rather than Saturday, Sunday. And there are lots of people who work in hospitality who understand that. You don't get always Saturday, Sunday off. Yeah. But as Ian just pointed out, the union would have to go back to the workers and say, we're giving something up. We're going to change something here. Maybe we're even in agreement with some of you moving to early retirement. And this is a union that's not used to backing down. They're this fast and forward. So when you ask them to kind of go backwards and give up some things that you've had, very difficult for them to do that.
Yes.
But thank you for your comments. That's good.
Thanks. We'll finish up with Ms. Goudreau, please. Go ahead.
I have one simple question. What is the recommendation, the main one, that you would make to us to ensure that the CEO of Canada Post will be able to deliver a report that is worthy of the respect of what Canada Post is, but not be in such a deficit position.
I'll take a first shot at that if I can. As I said in my remarks, the 3 changes that have been proposed are necessary but not sufficient. He has another 20 days to come back and tell you how he's going to move people to community mailboxes and Mr. Bullrich, where they're going to be located. In my case, they're on municipal rights of way. They aren't rented spaces. They're on municipal rights of way. He's got 20 days to tell you how many people he's going to probably furlough or move to early retirement. He's got 20 days to talk about some of these rural post offices, but that's not still enough. I don't know if he can give you the second half of that, is how do you then grow this business so that you can get rid of that extra $1 billion. But you should hold him accountable to that. That is why you have a CEO of the organization. And I think if he can get the last piece, which is this flexibility around the workforce, it is possible, I think, to win back some of this market share. But I've got to warn you, I don't know if it'll be enough. And again, frankly, you'll have to think about this. If he could reduce the deficit from $1.5 billion to just $500 million, and he says, look, I've done everything I can, but that's as low as I can get it, is this group prepared to say, well, maybe we should think about subsidizing it again? I don't know. But he hasn't had the ability to have a free hand to tackle that. So let's give him that chance, see what he comes back with.
Merci, Monsieur Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
He can give you 3 fast answers. Number 1, 5-day-a-week delivery has got to go. It's just not sustainable at all, going out to 17.5 million addresses, 52 weeks a year. Not possible. Number 2, franchise all the post offices that are corporate owned. And number 3, go to dynamic route scheduling so that they can reschedule to get that flexibility that they desperately need. Those 3 recommendations were in my report for 2024.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Lee, Mr. Ryder, thank you very much. It was very informative and very interesting and a bit funner than I thought it would be. Colleagues, thanks very much. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you Tuesday morning. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.